The millionaire was sitting in a restaurant when a poor little girl approached him and said, "Please marry my mother. She's all I have left," not realizing that he had been a widower for the past 10 years. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. Enjoy. Rain tapped gently on the windows of Romano's, the most high-end restaurant in downtown Manhattan. James Mitchell sat alone at his regular corner table, the same spot he'd taken every Tuesday evening for the last 10 years. The candlelight flickered, casting soft shadows across his worn face as he stared blankly at his untouched lobster plate. At 45, James held power in every boardroom he entered. His cold gray eyes had sealed billion-dollar deals, and his firm hands had built an empire from scratch. But tonight, like every Tuesday for the past decade, those same hands shook slightly as he reached for his wine glass. Rebecca would have loved this rain, he whispered, his voice barely rising above the soft jazz playing in the background. The empty chair across from him seemed to echo with her absence. The other diners respectfully gave him space. Everyone knew James Mitchell's story, the tech giant who lost his beloved wife in a car crash exactly 10 years ago and never quite came back from the pain. That's when she appeared. A tiny figure in a pink dress walked up to his table with steps that looked far too confident for someone so young. Her blonde hair was tied into uneven pigtails with mismatched ribbons, and her little sneakers squeaked on the marble floor. It felt like the whole restaurant held its breath as this 6-year-old girl approached the most powerful man in the room. "Excuse me, sir," Emma said, her voice clear and steady despite what she was about to ask. Her big blue eyes met his without a hint of fear. James looked up surprised. Children were a rare sight in Romanos, and this one was heading straight for him with purpose. "Please," Emma said again, her small hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I need you to marry my mom." The words floated in the air like a whispered wish. Conversations at nearby tables stopped. Even the waiters froze mid-step. James blinked, unsure if he'd heard her right. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" Emma took a deep breath, as if she'd practiced this moment over and over. "My mom. She's all I have left in the world. And I think maybe you need someone too." Her simple, honest words hit James like a blow to the chest. How could this little girl see something he had hidden so well for the past 10 years? "She works 2 jobs to keep us going," Emma continued, glancing toward the kitchen where her mother, Sarah, was hustling around as a temp worker. "She cries at night when she thinks I'm asleep. She's tired, she's scared, and she deserves someone who will take care of her like she takes care of me." James felt something break open inside him, like a wall he'd spent a decade building up with grief. "Sweetheart," he said softly, "I don't even know your mom." Emma smiled then, a bright, heartwarming smile that lit up her whole face. "That's okay. I know enough about both of you. You come here every Tuesday and never eat your food. You're sad, just like my mom. But maybe, if you're sad together, you won't have to be sad anymore." Before James could find words to respond, a woman's panicked voice cut through the restaurant. "Emma! Emma, where are you?" Sarah rushed out through the kitchen doors, her apron stained and her face flushed with panic. When she saw her daughter, standing beside the most famous man in the room, her eyes went wide with shock. The moment James truly saw Sarah, everything shifted. She wasn't just beautiful. She radiated the same warmth that glowed from her daughter, but he could also see the tiredness Emma had mentioned. The burden of someone who had carried far too much on her own. Their eyes met across the dimly lit restaurant, and for the first time in 10 years, James felt something stir in his heart, a glimpse of something possible. Sarah rushed to the table, her heart pounding with embarrassment and dread. Her job at Romanos was supposed to be invisible, slip through the kitchen, serve the elite, collect her pay, and vanish. The last thing she ever wanted was for her 6-year-old daughter to approach the most powerful man in town. "Emma, what are you doing?" Sarah whispered urgently as she reached the table, her hands shaking as she gripped her daughter's shoulders. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Mitchell," she said. She wandered out of the kitchen. It won't happen again. James stood up slowly, his tall 6'2" frame unfolding with calm. But instead of the anger Sarah feared, his expression was unreadable, almost curious. Actually, James said, his tone surprisingly kind, Emma and I were having a rather interesting conversation. He looked down at the little girl who still stood between them, confident and steady. She was telling me about someone very important. He added, Sarah's cheeks flushed with heat. Whatever she said, I'm sure she didn't mean to bother you, she said quickly. Emma, we need to go back to the kitchen right now. But Mom, Emma protested. I was just trying to help. You always say good things happen to people who are brave enough to ask. Those words hit Sarah like a punch. They were the same ones she had whispered to Emma 3 months earlier, after they'd received an eviction notice. Words meant to give her daughter hope when Sarah had none left herself. James watched their exchange with growing interest. He noticed the pride and the desperation in Sarah's eyes, the way she held herself with strength despite being clearly exhausted. There was something about her that reminded him of a kind of courage he hadn't seen in years. Please, James said, motioning to the empty chair across from him. Sit with me for a moment. Sarah glanced nervously toward the kitchen. I can't. I'm working. If the manager sees me sitting with a customer, I own a significant share in this restaurant. James said calmly, I don't think anyone will object. Sarah froze. She had known James Mitchell was rich, but she hadn't realized just how much power he held. She looked down at Emma, who was practically bouncing with excitement. 5 minutes, Sarah said at last, settling into the chair hesitantly. Then I really do need to get back. James poured water into a glass and slid it toward her. Emma tells me you're working 2 jobs. 3, actually, Sarah corrected, then instantly regretted revealing it. But we're okay. We don't need charity. I wasn't offering charity, James replied. I was just making conversation. There's a difference. Emma climbed up into the seat beside her mom, her little legs swinging freely. Mr. Mitchell, do you have any kids? She asked. James visibly tensed. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, Sarah thought he wouldn't answer. No, he said finally, his voice low. I don't. Did you ever want kids? Emma asked, again, completely unaware of how deep her question cut. Sarah was about to interrupt, but James gently raised a hand. Very much, he said. My wife and I talked about it often. What happened to her? Emma asked with childlike honesty. Emma, Sarah gasped, horrified by her daughter's boldness. But James didn't seem upset. Instead, he looked at Emma with a kind of quiet respect. She died in an accident 10 years ago. Emma grew thoughtful. That's why you're sad. Like my mom is sad about my daddy. Sarah's heart caught in her chest. Emma rarely mentioned David, who had died of cancer when she was just 4. But somehow, this little girl was connecting the dots in a way that both amazed and unsettled her. Yes, James said gently. That's exactly why I'm sad. The 3 of them sat in a moment of calm silence, connected by grief and the surprising wisdom of a 6-year-old girl who seemed to understand things beyond her years. Maybe, Emma finally said, you could try being happy together, just to see what it feels like. Before either adult could speak, the restaurant manager appeared at their table, his face flushed with tension. Mr. Mitchell, I'm terribly sorry for the disturbance. Sarah, you're needed in the kitchen immediately. The moment was broken. Sarah stood quickly and pulled Emma with her. Thank you for being so kind, she said to James. Come on, Emma. We've already taken up too much of Mr. Mitchell's time. As they walked away, James called after them. Sarah? She turned, her heart racing. What's your last name? Bennett, she answered. Sarah Bennett. James nodded thoughtfully. It was very nice to meet you, Sarah Bennett. And you too, Emma. As Sarah and her daughter disappeared back into the kitchen, James remained standing at his table, staring at the spot where they had been. For the first time in 10 years, the chair across from him didn't feel completely empty. But in the kitchen, Sarah was met by a much colder reality. "Sarah, what the hell were you thinking?" Marcus Rivera, the night manager, grabbed her arm as she entered. His grip was tight enough to bruise, and his voice full of the authority of someone itching for control. "It wasn't planned," Sarah said, keeping her voice calm while Emma clung close. "She just wandered off." Mr. Mitchell was actually very understanding. "Understanding?" Marcus laughed sharply. "You have no idea who that man is. James Mitchell doesn't understand anything. He crushes people like insects. You're lucky to still have a job." Sarah stayed quiet. She couldn't risk losing this position. Not when they were already 3 weeks behind on rent, and Emma needed shoes for school. The temp agency had warned her. One complaint from Romanos, and she'd be blacklisted from every upscale place in the city. "It won't happen again," Sarah said firmly. "Come on, Emma." As they walked toward the tiny staff break room, Sarah could feel Marcus's eyes on her. Calculating. She recognized that look. The gaze of a man who had just discovered leverage and was deciding how to use it. The break room was barely big enough for a small table and 2 chairs. But it was the only space where Emma could sit safely while Sarah worked. Weeks ago, she'd cleared it with the day manager, explaining her sitter had canceled, and she couldn't afford to miss shifts. "Mommy," Emma said as Sarah helped her out of her jacket. "Mr. Mitchell seemed really nice." Why was Marcus so mad? Sarah knelt in front of her, brushing back a strand of her daughter's blonde hair. How could she explain the world of status and power to a 6-year-old? "Sometimes," Sarah said slowly, "important people don't like being disturbed, and we have to respect that." "But he didn't seem like he wanted to be left alone," Emma said. "He looked lonely, like you, when you think I'm not watching." The words pierced Sarah's heart. She tried so hard to hide her sadness from Emma. But children noticed everything. The stress, the late-night tears, the worry that came from living paycheck to paycheck. "Baby," Sarah whispered, pulling Emma into a tight hug. "I need you to promise me something. No more talking to customers, okay? I know you were trying to help, but it could get us both in trouble." Emma nodded quietly. "I promise, Mommy. But can I ask something?" "What is it?" "Do you think Daddy would want you to be happy again?" The question hit Sarah hard. David had been gone for 2 years, but Emma still spoke about him like he might walk through the door at any moment. Sarah had encouraged that at first, thinking it was healthy. But now, she wasn't so sure. "Daddy loved us very much," Sarah said softly. "And yes, I think he'd want us to be happy. But happiness isn't always about finding someone new, Emma. Then why do you cry at night?" Emma asked, her voice honest and small. "I hear you sometimes. You work so hard. But we're still always worried about money." Sarah closed her eyes. "Life isn't that simple, sweetheart." Sarah was just about to speak when a knock came at the break room door. Marcus stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Sarah, I need a word with you. Alone." Her stomach dropped. "Emma, stay here and color your book. All right?" "I'll be right back." Out in the hallway, Marcus leaned casually against the wall, arms crossed. "Look, I like you, Sarah. You work hard and don't cause issues. Usually." "But," Sarah prompted, knowing something else was coming. "But what happened tonight can't happen again. Mr. Mitchell may have seemed friendly, but men like him don't forget. If he decides you're a problem, it won't just be your job here that's on the line. His reach goes far in this industry." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe it's time to find other childcare arrangements. Bringing your daughter here was always supposed to be temporary." His words landed like a blow. Sarah's grocery store job barely covered the essentials. Her evening shifts at Romano's were what kept a roof over their heads. Without both jobs, they'd be out on the street in a month. Please, she said, hating the sound of desperation in her own voice. She stays in the break room. She doesn't bother anyone. Tonight was a one-time thing. Marcus studied her closely. All right, I'll give you 2 weeks to figure something out. After that, she can't come here anymore. And Sarah, if anything like tonight happens again, you're both out. Understood? Sarah nodded, afraid to speak. As Marcus walked away, she leaned against the wall, trying to catch her breath. 2 weeks. That's all she had to find a babysitter she couldn't afford, or a better job that didn't exist. Back in the break room, Emma looked up from her coloring book with bright, hopeful eyes. Is everything okay, Mommy? Sarah forced a smile. Everything's fine, baby. Everything's going to be just fine. But even as she said it, she couldn't shake the feeling that their brief encounter with James Mitchell had set something in motion, something she couldn't control. And in a life already hanging by a thread, that was terrifying. James sat in his penthouse office at 2 a.m., the city below glittering like a circuit board. The untouched dinner from Romano's had been replaced by an untouched glass of whiskey. His ritual of not eating had simply shifted locations. He couldn't stop thinking about them. Emma's bold blue eyes, so much like a pair he used to know. Sarah's quiet strength, her tired grace. The way they saw him not as James Mitchell, billionaire, but simply as a man in need of kindness. A photo on his desk caught the lamplight. Rebecca's smile was frozen in time. She'd been gone for 10 years, 4 months, and 12 days. Not that he was counting. What would you think of them, Becca? He whispered, looking at their wedding photo, her joy forever etched into the frame. Would you think I'm crazy for caring about a woman I've known less than half an hour? Silence. But in his memory, he could hear her voice. Rebecca had never held back her opinions, especially about the heart. Life is for the living, James, she'd once said at a friend's funeral. Don't waste yours mourning me. But he had. 10 years of just existing, going through motions, while the real parts of him stayed frozen in that moment. When the officer showed up at his door, James opened his laptop, something he hadn't done for personal reasons in years. He searched for Sarah Bennett. Her digital footprint was sparse. Few outdated social media posts, mostly pictures of Emma at parks and school events. No mention of a husband, but he found David Bennett's obituary, age 31, survived by wife Sarah and daughter Emma. Short, simple, but James could read between the lines. Young couple, likely married after college. Cancer. Medical bills insurance didn't cover. Sarah forced to rebuild while raising a child alone. He knew that story. His version just came with more zeros in the bank account. His phone buzzed. Board meeting moved to 9 a.m. Merger documents need review tonight. He looked at the message, then set the phone aside. The merger could wait. For the first time in 10 years, something else mattered more. He wondered, was Emma asleep in whatever small apartment they could afford? Did she have her own room, or did she share with her mother? The idea of that brave little girl lacking essentials stirred something fierce inside him. Then the intercom buzzed. Mr. Mitchell, I'm sorry to disturb you, but there's a call from Romano's. They said it's urgent. Put it through. Mr. Mitchell, this is Marcus Rivera, the night manager at Romano's. Sorry for the late call. What's this about, Marcus? Well, it's regarding tonight's incident with our temp worker. I just wanted to assure you we've handled it. The employee's been reprimanded, and we've introduced new policies so this doesn't happen again. James felt something cold form in his chest. What exactly are you telling me? The woman, Sarah Bennett, won't be bringing her child to work anymore. I've made it clear that any future disturbances will lead to immediate termination. I wanted you to know we take customer privacy seriously. James's anger flared, not at Sarah, but at the presumption that he wanted them punished. Mr. Rivera, did I, at any point, express dissatisfaction with Miss Bennet or her daughter? Pause. No, sir, but I assumed. You assumed wrong, James snapped, his voice hard with the edge that made boardrooms fall silent. Miss Bennet and her daughter were no trouble at all. In fact, they brightened my evening. I see. Should I reconsider the policies? James paused. Getting involved could attract attention, maybe even make Sarah's life harder. But doing nothing felt worse. He'd spent enough of his life walking away. What I think, James said finally, is that employees who work hard and treat customers with dignity should be supported, not threatened. I trust you'll remember that. Of course, Mr. Mitchell. Absolutely. The call ended. James leaned back in his chair, dragging his hands through his hair. He was more involved than he'd meant to be. But Emma's words had stirred something in him. Something long dormant. His eyes drifted to Rebecca's photo once more. She's not you, Becca, he murmured. And maybe that's exactly what I need. Even saying it brought guilt rushing in. Was it betrayal to care about someone new? Was he being foolish to open his heart again, knowing how much loss hurt? Those questions followed him into bed, where he lay awake till dawn, thinking of blue eyes, both the ones he had lost and the ones he'd just met. The next morning brought challenges Sarah hadn't planned for. She barely slept 3 hours before Emma bounced into her room, excitedly talking about Mr. James and whether they'd see him again. Emma, honey, Sarah said as she helped her dress for Mrs. Chin, their neighbor who'd agreed to watch her. I need you to understand something important. Last night was special, but it probably won't happen again. Why not? Emma asked, frowning. He seemed really nice. And lonely. Really lonely. Sarah paused, folding Emma's shirt. Her daughter's emotional awareness never failed to surprise her. At 6, Emma read people better than most adults. Sometimes, Sarah said gently, people from different worlds aren't meant to be part of each other's lives. But worlds can change, Emma said with certainty only children have. Like when we moved to this new apartment. Different world, same us. Sarah felt the weight of Emma's words more deeply than she expected. Her daughter was right. Their world had shifted completely after David's death. From a comfortable middle-class life to struggling paycheck to paycheck. From a home with a yard to a cramped studio apartment above a Korean restaurant. The change had been heartbreaking, but they had survived it. This, however, felt different. Now it involved a man who lived in a world so far removed from theirs. Even thinking about him felt risky. Her phone buzzed. A message from the temp agency. New. Assignment available. High-end catering event tonight. Triple overtime pay. Interested. Triple overtime could be the difference between paying rent or being evicted. Sarah replied instantly. Yes. The reply came within minutes. Great. Event is for the Mitchell Foundation. Gala. Black tie charity event. Report to Grand Central Ballroom at 4 p.m. for setup. Sarah's blood ran cold. The Mitchell Foundation. As in, James Mitchell. It felt like the universe had a cruel sense of humor. She called the agency right away. Is there another job available tonight? Anything else? Sorry, sweetie, came the tired voice of Linda, the dispatcher. This is the only slot left. Big event. Lots of overtime. Most girls would kill for this shift. Sarah closed. Her eyes. She couldn't afford to say no. Not with triple pay on the line. But the thought of seeing James Mitchell again, especially in his own space, surrounded by his people, it twisted her stomach with dread. I'll take it, she finally said. Good. And Sarah, this is a high-profile event. Be on your absolute best behavior, all right? We can't have any issues with the Mitchell Foundation. They're one of our biggest clients. After hanging up, Sarah sat on the tiny couch in her apartment, trying to digest what just happened. In less than 12 hours, she had gone from hoping she'd never see James Mitchell again to preparing to serve drinks at his charity gala. Irony hit hard. She would be there as part of the invisible crew, dressed in black, balancing silver trays, trained to blend in, not be seen. It was the perfect place to stay unnoticed, to watch James Mitchell from a distance, without the fear of another encounter like the night before. Or at least, that's what she told herself. By afternoon, Sarah had dropped Emma off at Mrs. Chen's with firm instructions. Don't mention Mr. Mitchell. Then she arrived at the Grand Central Ballroom. The place was being transformed into a dream. Crystal chandeliers, white orchids everywhere, and a small orchestra tuning in the corner. "You're Sarah Bennett?" a sharp-looking woman with a clipboard asked. "I'm Catherine Walsh, event coordinator. You're assigned to VIP service tonight. High-profile guests, including Mr. Mitchell himself. I trust that won't be an issue?" Sarah's heart pounded. "No problem at all." "Good. Mitchell Foundation events are always flawless. We intend to keep it that way. You'll be briefed shortly on the guest list, but the most important thing to remember is discretion. These guests value privacy, above all else." As Catherine walked away, Sarah noticed a large photo being hung at the entry. James Mitchell shaking hands with the mayor. Under it, a caption read, "10 years of the Rebecca Mitchell Foundation, honoring her legacy of caring." The foundation was named after his late wife. Sarah felt the air leave her lungs. This wasn't just a charity event. This was a memorial. A tribute to the woman James had loved and lost. And tonight, Sarah would be serving champagne and hors d'oeuvres in the middle of it. The weight of Emma's request, asking a grieving widower to marry her mother, now hit Sarah with full force. The embarrassment was overwhelming. "Sarah!" Catherine's voice snapped her out of it. "Guests are arriving. Please take your place at the VIP bar." As Sarah headed to her post, she caught her reflection in one of the ballroom mirrors. Black uniform, hair pulled tightly back, a silver name tag that simply read Sarah. She looked like exactly what she was. Staff. Unseen. Disposable. Perfect camouflage. She told herself, James Mitchell would never recognize her in a sea of high society. But as the room filled with New York's elite, designer gowns, tailored tuxedos, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a shift. And when James Mitchell walked into the ballroom, breathtaking in his black tuxedo, Sarah realized with dread that her disguise might not work at all. He was scanning the crowd, those sharp gray eyes searching. And Sarah feared he might be looking for someone in particular. James stepped into the ballroom with the poise of a man who had done this 100 times, but tonight didn't feel the same. For the first time in a decade, he wasn't just performing his role at the Rebecca Mitchell Foundation Gala. He was looking for someone. All day he'd told himself it was foolish. The odds of Sarah Bennett working this exact event? Almost zero. And even if she was here, she'd be busy. He'd be swarmed by board members, donors, politicians. No chance for a real conversation. Still, as he moved through the reception line, smiling, shaking hands, accepting both condolences and praise, a part of him remained distracted, eyes sweeping the floor. "James!" came a familiar voice. It was Eleanor Whitmore, the foundation's board chair, standing beside him with a champagne flute and her signature polite smile. "Wonderful turnout tonight. I think we might surpass last year's fundraising totals." Rebecca would be proud, James said automatically, a line he had perfected over the years. She would indeed. Eleanor agreed. "Also, the Patterson family is here. Victoria's been asking about you." James nodded politely, though internally he winced. Victoria Patterson was the newly divorced daughter of one of the foundation's biggest donors. and Eleanor had been trying to set them up for months. Perhaps later, he said. I should greet the guests first. Eleanor's smile tightened, but she nodded. Of course. But James, you know Rebecca would want you to be happy again. She wouldn't want you to be alone forever. The assumption in her voice, the idea that she knew what Rebecca would have wanted, made something cold settle in James's chest. But then, across the room, he saw her, Sarah, standing behind the VIP bar, hair pulled into a neat bun, every motion deliberate and efficient. She wore the same black uniform as everyone else, but to James, it was like a spotlight shone on her. Excuse me, Eleanor, James said, not bothering to hide his departure. I see someone I need to speak with. As he walked through the room, conversations paused, heads turned, people watched. James Mitchell didn't leave the receiving line. He didn't speak to servers. But here he was, cutting across the room toward the bar. Sarah looked up, and James saw it. The moment she recognized him, her eyes widened. Her hands froze over the cocktail shaker. Mr. Mitchell, she said, voice calm, but guarded. What can I get for you? Scotch. Neat, James replied. Then more softly. And maybe an explanation. Why didn't you tell me you'd be here tonight? Sarah's hand shook slightly as she reached for the bottle of top-shelf scotch. I didn't know you'd attend, she said under her breath. I knew it was your foundation. I just assumed someone else would be running the show. This was my wife's foundation, James replied, taking the glass from her. I've never missed a single gala. His words hung in the space between them, heavy with meaning. Sarah turned pale as realization hit. Oh no, she breathed. Last night, when Emma asked you to, this whole event is about your wife, isn't it? A memorial to her. James nodded slowly. The foundation supports children's hospitals and family programs. Rebecca believed keeping families together was the most important thing anyone could do. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She quickly tried to blink away. I'm so sorry. If I had known, if Emma had understood what she was asking, don't apologize, James said firmly. What Emma asked wasn't something to be sorry for. Before Sarah could reply, a new voice interrupted them. James, there you are. Victoria Patterson appeared beside him, her hand sliding possessively onto his arm. She was undeniably beautiful, tall, blonde, and elegant in a way that came from generations of wealth and elite finishing schools. I've been looking all over for you, she said. Her eyes swept over Sarah quickly, taking in her uniform and name tag. She didn't see a person, just someone who blended into the background. Could we get some champagne? She asked Sarah, not bothering to make eye contact. The Dom Perignon, please. Not whatever you're serving the rest of the guests. Sarah's jaw tensed, but her voice stayed calm and polite. Of course, right away. As Sarah turned to get the champagne, Victoria leaned in closer to James. Darling, Eleanor says the silent auction is going amazingly well. Your Hamptons weekend donation is apparently causing a serious bidding war. James barely heard her. His eyes were fixed on Sarah's reflection in the mirror behind the bar. He could see the quiet pain in her face as she poured the champagne, doing her best to stay composed. The difference between the two women was striking. One expected to be served without question. The other was used to serving others, even when it cost her self-respect. Here you are, Sarah said, handing Victoria the champagne flute with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Victoria took it without a word of thanks, already turning back to James. I was thinking we should dance later. The orchestra is playing some Sinatra after dinner. But James wasn't looking at her. His eyes were on Sarah, who was clearly trying to stay invisible while doing her job. This was the same woman who worked 3 jobs to take care of her daughter. The same woman whose 6-year-old daughter had recognized his sadness and dared to try and fix it. Actually, James said, his voice loud enough for people nearby to hear. I was hoping to continue my conversation with Miss Bennet. We were discussing some foundation matters. It was a smooth lie, totally believable, but it had a powerful effect. In an instant, Sarah went from being invisible staff to someone worthy of James Mitchell's personal time. Victoria's eyes sharpened with interest, and James noticed other guests beginning to take notice too. Foundation business? Victoria repeated, clearly skeptical. Ms. Bennet has valuable thoughts on family outreach, James said, still watching Sarah. I'd like to hear more about her perspective. Sarah looked like she wanted to disappear, but James kept going. He knew he was crossing a line, but it felt like exactly the right thing to do. What he didn't realize was that this public moment was going to start something bigger than either of them expected. Something that would not only affect him and Sarah, but also challenge the entire social structure that held their world together. And across the room, Eleanor Whitmore was already reaching for her phone, her face tight with concern. She had calls to make and damage to manage. 3 days later, a photo appeared in the New York Society section. James Mitchell, the city's most sought-after widower, was pictured in deep conversation with an unknown woman at his foundation's gala. The headline read, Mitchell Foundation. Gala raises record $3.2 million. But who's the mystery woman holding our most elusive bachelor's attention? Sarah stared at the photo on her phone while Emma munched cereal at their tiny kitchen table. In the photo, Sarah looked composed and professional, but anyone paying close attention could see the tension in her posture and the careful space she kept between herself and James, even as he leaned slightly toward her. You look so pretty in that picture, Mommy, Emma said, peeking at the screen. Is that Mr. James? Yes, sweetheart, Sarah replied gently. But remember what we talked about? This has to stay between us, okay? Emma nodded seriously, then brightened. Can we see him again soon? Before Sarah could answer, her phone rang. It was the temp agency. Sarah, honey, we need to talk. Linda's voice was tight with stress. I'm getting flooded with calls about you. Sarah's stomach clenched. What kind of calls? Requests, mostly. High-end clients saw that photo and now they're asking to book you specifically. But there are also some complaints. Some people think it was inappropriate for you to be seen with Mr. Mitchell like that. I didn't ask for that photo, Sarah said, panic rising. He came to me. I was just doing my job. I know, sweetie. But in this business, perception is everything. Linda sighed. I've got some good news and some not so good news. The good news, you're in demand. I could book you solid for 6 months at premium rates. The not so good news, some of our regular clients are nervous about the attention. They're worried about privacy. Sarah closed her eyes. She could lose the steady work they depended on, or take high-paying jobs that would keep her in James Mitchell's world, a place full of scrutiny and pressure. What do you think I should do? Sarah asked. Take the premium gigs while they last. Build up some financial cushion. But be careful, Sarah. Men like James Mitchell live in another world, and that world doesn't like surprises. When she ended the call, Sarah saw Emma watching, her with that too grown-up look she wore whenever adult problems leaked into their tiny apartment. Are we in trouble again? Emma asked. Sarah knelt down and hugged her tightly. No, baby, we're just figuring out some new things. But as she said it, Sarah could feel the balance of their carefully managed life shifting, and she had no idea where it was going. Later, that morning, after Emma left for her summer program, Sarah's phone buzzed with a new message. It was from an unknown number. This is James Mitchell. I hope the attention from the gala hasn't caused you too much trouble. If you're comfortable with it, I'd like to take you and Emma to lunch today. I want to apologize for putting you in a difficult spot. Sarah stared at the message for 10 full minutes. Every logical part of her told her to decline, politely but firmly, and maintain her distance. But another part of her, the part that had been numb since David's death, whispered that maybe Emma had been right. Maybe they were both tired of being sad. Of being alone. Sarah typed and deleted a dozen responses before finally settling on. Emma would love that. But somewhere private, please. The attention is already more than we're comfortable with. His reply came quickly. My apartment. I'll cook 1 p.m. I promise. It'll be completely private. Sarah's hands trembled as she replied, Okay. What she didn't know was that across town, Eleanor Whitmore was sitting in her Upper East Side office, making phone calls, setting into motion plans that would make their private lunch anything but private. Victoria, darling, Eleanor said smoothly into the phone. I think it's time we talked about your future at the foundation. And James's future, too. James's penthouse overlooked Central Park from the 42nd floor. But what struck Sarah most wasn't the view or the wealth. It was how empty the place felt. The furniture was elegant, but it had no warmth. It reminded her of a hotel, expensive, but impersonal. Mr. James, Emma squealed as the door opened, throwing her arms around him in a hug he returned with surprising ease. Hello, Emma, James said, smiling more genuinely than Sarah had seen before. I hope you're hungry. I might have gone a little overboard with lunch. He led them into a kitchen that was larger than Sarah's entire apartment. Clearly, he had put a lot of effort into what he'd described as a simple meal. There were neatly cut sandwiches, fresh fruit beautifully arranged on a tray, and what looked like homemade chocolate chip cookies cooling on a rack. "You made cookies?" Emma asked, eyes wide. Sarah couldn't hide her surprise as she asked, You made these? James gave a small, sheepish smile. Rebecca always said any meal worth sharing should end with something sweet. I haven't baked in, 10 years. I wasn't sure how they'd turn out. Emma was already inspecting the cookies with the seriousness of a tiny expert. They look amazing, she declared. Can I try one? After lunch, Sarah replied automatically, then hesitated. That is, if Mr. Mitchell says it's all right. I think we can bend the rules. A little, James said with a smile, handing her a warm cookie. And please, both of you, just call me James. As they ate together at his dining room table, Sarah felt herself slowly letting her guard down. James seemed different here, more open, more real. He asked Emma questions about her summer program and listened attentively as she shared every little detail about her current art project. He asked Sarah about her jobs too, in a way that didn't make her feel small for having them. I work mornings at Riverside Grocery, Sarah explained. It's steady, and the manager's flexible with my hours for Emma. The catering gigs help fill the gaps. That's a lot on your plate. James said thoughtfully. When do you even sleep? Sarah gave a small shrug. When Emma sleeps, we manage. Mommy's tired all the time. Emma chimed in with her usual blunt honesty. Sometimes she falls asleep while reading to me. Sarah flushed, but James's face held no judgment, only quiet understanding. Emma, he said gently, would you like to see something special? He led them to a room that had clearly once been a nursery. The walls were painted a soft yellow, and the space held a crib, a changing table, and neatly lined shelves filled with books and toys, all covered with white sheets, like everything had been frozen in time. Rebecca and I were going to have a baby, James said softly. We had everything ready. After she passed, I just shut the door. Emma walked around the room slowly, touching the furniture with care. Would you have loved the baby a lot? She asked. More than anything, James replied, his voice thick with emotion. I think that baby would have been lucky. Emma said matter-of-factly. You're good at looking after people. You took care of us today. Sarah saw James's face falter slightly at Emma's honest words. Without even thinking, she gently placed her hand on his arm. James, she said softly, you don't have to show us this if it's too much for you. He looked down at her hand, then back up at her. This is the first time in 10 years this room hasn't felt like a grave, he said. Emma's right. Rebecca and I would have loved our child the way you love Emma. The moment between them hung in the air, full of quiet understanding and something new, something possible. Sarah became sharply aware of how close they were standing. James was looking at her like she was something fragile but valuable. "Mommy?" Emma's voice snapped the tension. "Can we stay for dinner too?" Sarah quickly stepped back. "Emma, we've taken up enough of James's time already." "Actually," James interjected, "I was hoping you'd stay. There's something I'd like to talk to you both about." Sarah's pulse picked up. "What sort of something?" James exhaled slowly. "I've been thinking about what Emma said that night. About being sad together until we're not anymore. I know it sounds strange, but I can't stop thinking about it." "James," Sarah began, but he gently held up his hand. "I'm not asking for more than you're willing to give," he said. "But I'd like a chance to know you both better. Maybe we could start with dinner sometimes. I'd also like to help with Emma's school expenses. I know you're having a tough time and I want to support you." Sarah's pride rose quickly. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity," James said firmly. "It's friendship, and maybe, down the road, something more." His honesty made her chest tighten. Before she could reply, Emma called out from across the room. "So, does this mean you might marry Mommy after all?" Both Sarah and James turned to her, startled. Emma beamed proudly, like she'd solved a mystery. "Emma!" Sarah gasped, but James was looking at Sarah, and there was something in his expression that made her breath catch. "Maybe," he said softly, eyes never leaving Sarah's. "If your mom's brave enough to take a chance on a tired old widower." Sarah felt the world tilt slightly. This wasn't the life she'd imagined. She had planned to work hard, raise her daughter, and keep surviving, falling for a billionaire who baked cookies and kept a nursery preserved for 10 years. That wasn't part of the plan. But looking at James now, she didn't see the intimidating figure from the restaurant. She saw a man who was just as scared and just as full of hope as she was. "I think," Sarah said slowly, "that we're both too smart to make any huge decisions based on one afternoon." James smiled, and it was the first truly relaxed smile she'd ever seen from him. "You're right," he said. "We should probably spend at least 2 afternoons together before we plan a wedding." Emma clapped with delight, but Sarah felt a twinge of unease, like they were walking into something dangerous. On the other side of the city, Eleanor Whitmore sat in her wood-paneled office, reviewing her plan like a strategist before battle. For 10 years, she'd kept James focused on the Foundation's mission while steering his social life carefully. His grief had made him easy to manage, predictable. But now, Sarah Bennett had entered the picture. Eleanor had done her research. Widowed mother, multiple jobs, steep medical debt. Sarah was a vulnerability that could cloud James's judgment and threaten the balance Eleanor had worked years to protect. Her first call was to Marcus Rivera. "Mr. Rivera, it's Eleanor Whitmore from the Mitchell Foundation. We need to discuss one of your employees." "Yes, Ms. Whitmore, how can I help?" "Sarah Bennett has created some complications. It would be best if her employment at Romanos were reviewed." There was a pause. "Actually, Mr. Mitchell specifically asked me to make sure Ms. Bennett was treated fairly. Letting her go might not go over well." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. James was already defending the woman. Worse than she thought. "I see. Well, maybe there are other ways to handle it." Her next call was to Victoria Patterson. "Victoria, darling, I believe it's time we talked about your future. James needs guidance right now, and I think you're exactly the one to offer it." "Something happen?" Victoria asked, instantly intrigued. "Let's just say he's making some questionable choices. Are you free for lunch tomorrow?" Eleanor's final and most crucial call was to Harrison Cole, the Foundation's attorney and her most reliable supporter. "Harry, we've got a problem. James is getting involved with someone completely unsuitable. I need to know our options to protect the foundation. What sort of involvement? Harrison's tone was cautious, the kind that could lead to marriage if we don't act. This woman could ruin everything we've built. She's a gold digger with a kid. If James loses focus, our reputation, our funding, it all collapses. Eleanor, that's his private life. Is it? James controls 60% of the foundation's assets. If his personal life damages our image, that affects thousands of families. We can't afford that risk. It was a carefully crafted argument, framed around community and good work. It gave Eleanor the cover she needed. What are you suggesting? Harrison asked, though he sounded like he already knew he wouldn't like it. Research. Background checks. If she's hiding anything, we need to find it before it's too late. Meanwhile, Sarah was dealing with her own doubts. She'd agreed to see James again, dinner the next evening. But her mind was full of warnings. Mrs. Chin, she said to the elderly neighbor who often looked after Emma. Can I ask you something personal? Of course, dear. What's on your mind? If someone wanted to help you, to make your life better, but you weren't sure if they had hidden motives, what would you do? Mrs. Chin looked closely at Sarah, her eyes full of wisdom gathered from a life of experience. She saw instantly the signs of a woman standing at a turning point. This about the man Emma keeps mentioning, the one who bakes cookies? Sarah gave a small nod, not trusting herself to speak. Let me ask you something instead, Mrs. Chin said gently. Are you afraid that he's not being honest about his feelings, or are you scared that he's telling you the truth? The question struck Sarah harder than she expected. She'd been so consumed with all the reasons a relationship with James Mitchell couldn't work that she hadn't faced the more frightening possibility. That Emma might be right, that they could actually be happy together. What if I'm not enough? Sarah whispered. What if I'm just a distraction? Something temporary, while he's still grieving? And what if? Mrs. Chin replied. You're exactly what he needs. And what if you're both strong enough to find out? That night, as Sarah tucked Emma into bed, her daughter looked up with serious, searching eyes. Mommy, are you going to marry James? Emma, we've only known him a week. But do you like him? Sarah considered lying. But Emma had a way of sensing dishonesty. Yes, she finally admitted. I do like him. A lot. And he likes you too, I can tell. Oh yeah? How? Emma smiled knowingly, as if it were obvious. Because he looks at you the same way Daddy used to. Like you're the most important person in the whole world. The comment made Sarah's heart squeeze with both hope and fear. Because she knew Emma was right. James did look at her like that. And for the first time in 2 years, Sarah was beginning to return that look. But none of them knew that Eleanor Whitmore had just hired one of New York's most thorough private investigators to dig into Sarah's past. And what he was about to find could destroy everything, before it even had a chance to begin. The final report landed on Eleanor's desk exactly 1 week after she'd ordered it. She opened the folder with the calm satisfaction of someone whose instincts had been right all along. The first few pages held nothing surprising. Confirmation of Sarah's financial hardship, her late husband's medical debts, and of full employment history. But on page 7, Eleanor's expression changed. A cold smile crept across her face. There it was, clear as day. Sarah hadn't just lost her husband to cancer. She'd been pregnant at the time, with a second child. The pregnancy ended in miscarriage during the same week her husband died. But that wasn't the worst part. David Bennett had passed away on the exact same day as Rebecca Mitchell, in the same hospital. From the same rare form of cancer. While Sarah was in the maternity ward losing her baby, James had been upstairs in the ICU, saying goodbye to his wife. They had lived through the worst day of their lives on the exact same date, in the exact same place, without ever knowing it. Eleanor closed the folder slowly and picked up her phone. This wasn't information to be revealed immediately. No, If used right, it would destroy the connection between James and Sarah permanently. It had to be done at just the right moment, for maximum effect. That moment arrived 3 days later when James called an emergency board meeting. He wanted to discuss expanding the foundation's reach to offer more immediate financial help for struggling families. James, said Harrison Cole, the foundation's lead counsel, choosing his words carefully, this would take the foundation in a very different direction than Rebecca originally intended. Are you sure this is what you want? I'm sure, James answered, with the commanding tone that built his empire. There are families who need help now, not just long-term plans or programs. Families like... He stopped himself before saying Sarah's name. But Eleanor noticed. You mean families like the Bennetts? She asked smoothly. James turned sharply. What do you know about them? Perhaps the better question is what you don't know, she said, sliding the manila folder across the table. You should read this before we continue. James opened it, his expression growing more serious with every page. Eleanor watched closely as his face changed. Confusion turned to shock, then to something colder. This can't be right, he said hoarsely. I had the details confirmed by 3 separate sources. Eleanor replied gently. I'm sorry. I know this is hard. James kept staring at the pages. Sarah's husband had died on February 23rd, the exact same date as Rebecca, at Metropolitan General. While he'd been watching his wife fade away, Sarah had been downstairs, losing both her husband and unborn child. She never told me, he muttered. Can you blame her? Said Victoria Patterson, speaking up for the first time. Her voice carried false sympathy, carefully measured. I mean, once she learned who you were, how could she resist? The coincidence is just too perfect. That's enough, James said sharply, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. James, Eleanor said softly, I know you care about her, but what if she's been playing you from the start? What if she coached her daughter to approach you that night, to make herself seem vulnerable, someone you'd want to help? The words hit him like a slap. Emma's brave approach, Sarah's refusal to accept help, her insistence on not wanting charity. What if it had all been part of a plan? I need to speak with her, James said, rising to his feet. Is that smart? Harrison asked. If she's been misleading you, confronting her might just give her time to craft more lies. But James wasn't listening. He was already heading for the exit. This meeting is adjourned. As the others began to file out, Eleanor allowed herself a faint, satisfied smile. The doubt was planted. Now she just had to let it grow. Across town, Sarah was brushing Emma's hair, completely unaware that her world was about to crack open. She had always planned to tell James the truth about David's death and the date, but the timing never felt right. How do you explain to someone you're falling in love with that your lives were joined by tragedy before you ever even met? Emma chattered about camp while Sarah's phone rang. It was James. Sarah's face lit up as she answered. Hi, she said warmly. Emma was just saying she wanted to see you this weekend. Sarah, James replied, his voice clipped and cold. We need to talk. Her heart sank instantly. What's wrong? I think you know. I don't understand. February 23rd, James said quietly. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. David died that day, he continued. At Metropolitan General, didn't he? Sarah collapsed onto the couch, her hands shaking. James, let me explain. Explain what? That you've been hiding the truth from me since day one. That your daughter's request wasn't innocent after all. It wasn't like that, Sarah said quickly. Emma has no idea about the connection. She was too little when David died. She doesn't even know the date. But you knew, James said, his voice low and full of hurt. From the moment you heard my name, you knew what we shared. Yes, Sarah whispered. But James, that's not the reason. I don't want to hear any more lies. James cut in firmly. I thought Emma was brave to approach me. I believed you were different, but you're just like everyone else who sees dollar signs when they look at me. The call ended. Sarah stared at her phone, stunned. Emma continued playing with her dolls, completely unaware that their short-lived happiness had just been shattered by the very truth Sarah had been trying to protect them from. What Sarah didn't know was that Eleanor Whitmore had already moved on to the next phase of her plan, one designed to make sure James Mitchell never looked at another woman the way he had looked at Sarah Bennett. 3 weeks passed in a blur of hurt and confusion. Sarah threw herself into work, taking extra shifts at the grocery store and accepting every catering gig the agency offered. Emma asked about James constantly, until Sarah finally had to sit her down and explain that they wouldn't be seeing him anymore. But why? Emma asked, her voice insistent, sensing there was more to the story than she was being told. Sometimes adults have disagreements, Sarah explained gently, and sometimes those can't be fixed. Did you have a fight? Something like that. But you love him, Emma said plainly, surprising Sarah with her bluntness. I can tell. Sarah's breath hitched. And he loves you too, Emma added. When he looked at you, he had the same happy sad face you get when you talk about Daddy. The insight struck deep. Emma was right. Despite all logic and hesitation, Sarah had fallen in love with James Mitchell, and losing him hurt more than she had prepared for. Meanwhile, James was learning that righteous anger was no substitute for the warmth and comfort he'd felt around Sarah and Emma. His apartment felt colder than ever, and he found himself standing in the nursery for hours, remembering how perfectly Emma had fit into that room. Victoria Patterson, at Eleanor's invitation, had become a constant presence, dropping by his office with lunch, suggesting dinners, attending foundation events as his informal +1. She was everything Sarah wasn't. Polished, predictable, and safe. And James felt absolutely nothing. You seem distracted tonight, Victoria remarked as they left yet another gala. Still thinking about that woman? Her name is Sarah, James replied quietly. James, darling, you need to move on, she insisted. Eleanor showed me the investigator's report. The woman was clearly manipulating you. James stopped walking. What investigator's report? Victoria turned pale. I thought you knew. Eleanor had her investigated. That's how she found out about the connection to your wife's death. Something cold and sharp settled inside James. Eleanor hired a private investigator. She was trying to protect you, Victoria said quickly. She was worried about the foundation's reputation. James said nothing during the rest of the car ride. But inside, his thoughts were racing. Eleanor had dug into Sarah's past without his knowledge, invaded her privacy, and used what she found to ruin something that mattered to him. The next morning, James called for an emergency board meeting. Eleanor, he began without hesitation. You're fired. The room erupted into quiet shock. Your unauthorized investigation into a private citizen's background was unacceptable. Clean out your office. James, you're making a mistake, Eleanor said, her calm demeanor finally cracking. That woman, James interrupted, is someone whose privacy you violated to serve your own interests. This meeting is over. As the board members exited in stunned silence, Harrison Cole lingered behind. James, are you sure about this? He asked. Eleanor's been with the foundation since Rebecca founded it. Rebecca would be horrified by what Eleanor did, James said firmly. Frankly, so am I. But even firing Eleanor didn't fix the real issue. James had accused Sarah of deception, when in truth, she had only been trying to protect herself and her daughter from exactly what Eleanor had done. He'd been wrong, utterly, painfully wrong. James spent the entire day searching for the right way to apologize. Flowers felt meaningless. Calling seemed cowardly. Showing up at her apartment unannounced might scare her. In the end, he did the only thing that felt right. He went to Romanos. Marcus Rivera looked startled when James arrived. "Mr. Mitchell, we weren't expecting you tonight. Is Sarah Bennett working?" Marcus hesitated. "She doesn't work here anymore." James's stomach dropped. "Did she say why?" "She said she needed to focus on other opportunities," Marcus admitted. "But honestly, I think the attention from that newspaper photo made things hard. Some of the other staff weren't very kind." James closed his eyes. Sarah had lost her job. Because of him. Because he'd brought unwanted attention into her life. "Do you know where she's working now?" "I heard she picked up more hours at Riverside Grocery," Marcus said. Then he added, gently, "But Mr. Mitchell, maybe it's best to let her go. She seemed really upset when she left." James nodded slowly and turned to leave. But Marcus called out, "For what it's worth, she's a good person, one of the best we've had. And that little girl, she talks about you like you hung the moon." Those words stayed with James all the way home, where he sat in his silent apartment, trying to figure out how to fix the biggest mistake he'd ever made. What he didn't know was that Sarah was only a few blocks away, lying awake in her bed and wondering the same thing. If she had made a mistake by walking away from the first man who had made her feel alive since David died. And neither of them knew that Emma had been listening far more than they realized. And she was already forming a plan of her own. Because sometimes, it takes a 6-year-old to remind grown-ups that love requires courage, even when it's scary. Emma Bennett had heard enough grown-up talk to know that adults often let fear stop them from fixing their mistakes. So, one chilly Saturday morning, while Sarah was working an extra shift at Riverside Grocery, Emma made a bold choice, one that would have terrified her mother. She was going to visit James Mitchell. Mrs. Chin had agreed to take Emma to Central Park that morning, but Emma had a different destination in mind. She remembered the tall building by the park. She'd seen it in a magazine during a doctor's visit. She knew James was sad. She knew her mom missed him. And she knew sometimes the bravest thing you could do was ask for help. The doorman was hesitant at first, but Emma's sincere explanation, that she needed to talk to Mr. James about something really important, eventually persuaded him. "Mr. Mitchell," the doorman said through the intercom, "there's a young visitor here. She says her name is Emma Bennett." James was in his study, staring at his 18th failed attempt at a letter to Sarah. He froze. "Send her up," he said, immediately. When the elevator opened, Emma stepped out in her favorite pink dress, holding a small wrapped gift and wearing the determined look of a child on a mission. "Hi, James," she said calmly. "We need to talk." James knelt down to meet her eyes, overwhelmed by how much he'd missed this little girl. "Emma, where's your mother? Does she know you're here?" "Mommy's working," Emma said honestly. "She's been crying a lot since you stopped coming. She thinks I don't notice. But I do." James felt the words strike him like a physical blow. "Emma, I'm so sorry," he murmured. "That's actually why I came to talk to you." Emma interrupted, with the same boldness that had first captured his heart. "You and Mommy argued about something that happened before I was born, didn't you?" James nodded, unable to speak. "Well, I brought something that might help," she said, holding out a small wrapped package. "Mommy doesn't know I took this. I found it in her special box where she keeps Daddy's things." James carefully unwrapped the package, his fingers trembling. Inside was a hospital bracelet labeled David Bennett, February 23rd, Metropolitan General Hospital, and a small faded ultrasound image. "That's my baby brother," Emma said quietly. "He was supposed to be born, but he went to heaven the same day as Daddy. Mommy was really, really sad for a long time." James stared at the ultrasound, finally understanding the true depth of Sarah's loss. Not just her husband, but their unborn child as well. While he had mourned Rebecca, Sarah had been enduring a grief twice as deep. "Emma," James asked gently, "why are you showing me this?" "Because Mommy never talks about the baby," Emma said. "She's still too sad. But I think she's been sad long enough. And I think you've been sad long enough too." She reached into her small purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "There's something else. I found this with Daddy's things too. Mommy doesn't know I have it either." James unfolded the paper, and his world tilted. It was a handwritten letter from David, clearly written during his final days in the hospital. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you're facing the hardest thing anyone should have to face. Loving you has been the greatest joy of my life, but I need you to promise me something. Don't let grief define the rest of your life. Be brave enough to love again when the right person comes. You have so much love to give, and Emma needs to see that love survives loss. Don't honor me by staying sad. Honor me by living fully, by loving deeply, by showing our daughter that love is stronger than sorrow. Find someone who sees how extraordinary you are. Let them into your heart. I'll always be with you. But I want you to find someone who can be there in all the ways I no longer can. Love always. David." Tears streamed down James's cheeks as he finished the letter. "Emma, this is beautiful. But why are you giving it to me?" Emma climbed up onto the couch beside him and looked him straight in the eye, those same wide, wise eyes that reminded him so much of Sarah. "Because Daddy wanted Mommy to find someone who sees how amazing she is. And you do, don't you?" "Yes," James whispered, his voice breaking. "I do. And Mommy loves you too. I can tell. She gets the same kind of happy sad face that she used to get when she talked about Daddy." James pulled Emma gently into a hug. "You're an incredibly smart and very brave little girl." "So, are you going to fix it?" Emma asked, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. James thought about everything. The fight, Sarah's pain, the weeks they had lost, the chances they hadn't taken. Then he thought about Rebecca's words, and David's yes. He said at last, voice strong and certain, "I'm going to fix this, but I'm going to need your help." 2 hours later, Sarah returned from her shift at the grocery store. Mrs. Chin was waiting in the hallway, barely containing her excitement. "Sarah, dear." Emma had a lovely morning at the park. Made a few new friends, too. Sarah unlocked the apartment door, calling out, "Emma, honey, I'm home," and stopped cold. Her tiny apartment had been transformed. White roses were everywhere. Dozens of them. Candles flickered softly on every surface. Music played gently from a speaker she didn't own. In the middle of it all sat James Mitchell. On her small couch, Emma cuddled beside him. Both were smiling up at her with matching expressions full of hope. "Hi, Mommy," Emma chirped. James came to say sorry, and he brought presents. Sarah stood frozen, overwhelmed by the sight of the two people she cared about most, sitting together like they'd always belonged. "Sarah," James said softly, standing up, "I owe you an apology. One bigger than words can carry. I was wrong about everything. I let fear and pain turn me into someone cold. And I'm so sorry." "James," Sarah began, but he raised a hand gently. "Please, let me finish. Emma showed me David's letter today, and it made me realize we've both been carrying more grief than anyone should have to bear alone. Maybe that's why we found each other." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. Sarah's breath caught. "I'm not asking you to forget David or Rebecca," James continued, emotion tightening his voice. "I'm asking you to honor their memory by choosing to live again, to love fully, to build something new from the pieces of our broken hearts." He dropped to one knee. Tears streamed down Sarah's cheeks. Sarah Bennett, will you marry me? Will you let me be Emma's father? Will you help me fill that empty nursery with laughter and love, and build the kind of family that Rebecca and David would want for us? Emma bounced excitedly on the couch. Say yes, Mommy. Say yes. Sarah looked down at James, this man who had entered their lives like an answered prayer. A man who saw her not as a burden, but as someone worth choosing. Yes, she whispered. Then louder, her voice steady with certainty. Yes, James Mitchell, I'll marry you. As he slid the ring onto her finger, Emma jumped into their arms, creating a three-way hug that felt like home. I knew it would work. She beamed. I told you. You just had to be sad together. Until you weren't sad anymore. 6 months later, James and Sarah were married in the same ballroom where they had first truly seen each other. Emma was the proud flower girl, telling anyone who would listen that she had planned the whole thing. The nursery in James's penthouse had become Emma's room, complete with a reading nook where James read her bedtime stories every night. Sometimes, in the quiet hours, Sarah and James would sit together and talk about Rebecca and David. Not with sorrow, but with gratitude. Gratitude for the love they had once shared, and for the love they had dared to find again. Because Emma had been right all along. Love isn't about replacing what's lost. It's about believing that your heart can hold both grief and joy. Memories and new beginnings. The past that shaped you, and the future still waiting to be written. And that was the greatest gift they could give each other, and the most powerful lesson they would ever teach Emma. That living with an open heart is always the bravest choice.